This is just the beginning.
Welcome to an Axios virtual event, The Future of Employability. This is the second of a two-part event in conjunction with the Democratic National Convention. I'm Mike Allen, a co-founder of Axios, and I have a spoiler for you. I'm not in Milwaukee. So welcome to my home in Arlington, Virginia. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Microsoft, for making these conversations possible. And thank you for joining us on all the platforms where you see Axios events, on Axios.com, on our Twitter feed, Axios, with the hashtag Axios Events, on Facebook and on YouTube. Our first guest is Madam President, Randi Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, 1.7 million members, and the largest higher education union in the country. Randi Weingarten, welcome to Axios.
It's great to be with you virtually, Mike.
Well, thank you. And you are a Democratic National Committee superdelegate. I've seen you work conventions before. You're like me. You like to be out there. What's it like to be shut in during the Democratic National Convention?
So it is really surreal. And, so look, we just did our convention, the AFT convention, virtually for the first time ever. And it was the first time we didn't have a convention in 100 years, except for World War II. So I had a little bit of a taste of it by doing stuff on screen and, figuring out how to do all that and praying to make sure that there was no technical glitches. So I understand what the techies were going through in terms of the DNC. But I have to say, it was actually a lot better than I ever thought it would be. Just sitting there listening, I was riveted by Michelle Obama's speech, as was, I'm sure, most of the nation who watched it. But, there is something about this new normal that is very disconcerting because you're not in community with others. And so it's the first time that I have not been in a Democratic National Convention since 1992. And so you have to really be intentional about recreating community and making Zoom your friend, and really be intentional about the connections that we do and we make on a moment-to-moment basis.
Now, Randi Weingarten, you've been thinking a lot about remote learning. And going back to April, you've been helping schools and educators get ready to return. And a part of that is because of how remote learning played this spring. It was a fantastic success, right?
So, this is one of these things that I hate to say, we told you so, meaning that before the pandemic, if you had asked me that question, I would have said that distance learning is not a substitute for in person. It can supplement, but it can never substitute for. And now we've had this huge experiment where I would say virtually every single parent and every single teacher and every policymaker would now arrive at the same conclusion. Having said that, there are things that we could do to actually make it better, because at the end of the day, just like what's happening with the DNC, just like what just happened, in the last 24 hours with the University of North Carolina, that in a global pandemic where you have a virus that is very contagious and spreads asymptomatically, we have an obligation to make remote better, because until we can really decrease community spread throughout the United States, distance learning and distance working is going to be a fact of life.
Now, Randi, as long as I've covered you, you've been talking about closing the digital divide. And it turns out that the digital divide has never been more apparent.
Right. So this is, what you see, Mike, with the three crises that have kind of careened on the American people right now. And I'm not talking about democracy issues. I'm talking about a global pandemic, an economic crisis as the result of it, and a long long needed racial reckoning, that equity issues and inequities are hugely exposed through this. So, for example, in my household, we have 2 adults, 2 dogs, and at least 8 devices. At least 8 devices, the last I counted. And in households for most low income children in the United States of America, they had to rush to even get one device other than maybe a smartphone or a flip phone. And ultimately, even if they had that device, there may be 3 or 4 people using it. And even if they had that device, there would be an issue in terms of connectivity. A hotspot does not substitute for connectivity into a home or into a school. A hotspot does not substitute for reliable, high-speed Wi-Fi. And so throughout the country, you see this digital divide through the lens of equity and through the lens of wealth. We should be thinking about connectivity like we think about radio waves. It should be free to everyone.
And how do you think of access to broadband in relationship to equity?
So, as you know, we saw this in terms of McDowell County, West Virginia, so many years ago when we started that project, when there was no broadband, and the only way you could actually have internet connection in the school was to turn off the security system. Then, 5 years later, when we put broadband in, you see how it created huge access for everyone in the community. Broadband needs to be a fact of life in the United States, and it needs to be free for everyone, and it needs to be regulated in a way that it can be made equitably distributed all throughout America.
Now, Randy, aside from things that we know, social distancing, PPE, what's something we don't know about how schools can safely go back, or when they go back, how they can be safest?
So look, we have been at this since the beginning of April. As you said, we put out a report at the end of April about how to reopen safely because we didn't want to have the chaos that we had in closing or the chaos right now. I would say the one thing that is not talked about enough is confidence and trust. The schools in Europe that have reopened, it's because there is a sense that everyone knows the deal about public health. They may not agree ideologically with their governments, but they believe that their governments have their safety and health and well-being as a first priority. That, because we don't have that here in the United States, every single place because of the complexities here, if parents and teachers don't feel like something is going to be safe, it's going to be incredibly hard to actually create a welcoming and safe environment, whether it's in school or remote. That is probably the most important thing we can do other than really, truly following what the scientists tell us, not what the ideologues tell us.
Yeah, I've heard you talk a lot about the science of this, and sometimes it's not approached that way, but you see reopening classrooms as a literal science.
Correct. And look, I am a social studies teacher and a lawyer. I'm not a scientist, but I have to follow what the experts are telling us. They have a sense of what you actually need to do. And when you follow them, if we had done that, we would be in a lot better shape in the United States. Look at Europe right now versus looking at us. We need to have a healthy respect for the science and for the scientists. They will help us through a health epidemic.
Randy, you've been way ahead on this issue. We appreciate your sharing your insights. As we say goodbye, we like to end with a smile to go, one fun thing. And I know that in shutdown, some of us are getting heavier in shutdown. Like you've changed your outdoor routine, right?
Yeah, I tried to actually I didn't want to have the COVID-19. Look, I'm 62 years old, so I have started walking again, jogging again, and swimming again.
And of those three, which are you most likely to enter a race in?
It would be really great to add biking and to do a triathlon.
I'll be there with you, cheering, not riding. Madam President, Randi Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, thank you for joining Axios.
Thank you very much, Mike. Stay safe.
As we continue our conversations about the future of employability, our next guest is Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft. He's in charge of all things legal, has an empire of 1,400 people across 56 countries. The New York Times has called him the ambassador for tech to the world at large. Brad Smith, welcome to Axios.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of your many accomplishments, your very first one is special this week because as we mark the Democratic National Convention, you are a proud native of the Milwaukee area, Appleton, Wisconsin. What's it like to have your world in the spotlight?
Well, I'm both excited that this convention is based in Milwaukee, and I'm disappointed that we're not in Milwaukee today. I was really looking forward to being back in Wisconsin for this, but I still think it's a wonderful opportunity to shine a light on a state that has always been just terrific, and a city in Milwaukee that has really been moving forward with leaps and bounds, I think, in recent years especially.
Brad, you're one of the great thinkers and influencers in tech. You're a big tweeter, and you've been tweeting about an exciting concept, and that is an inclusive economic recovery. Tell us what you mean when you talk about an inclusive economic recovery.
Well, I think we really need an economic recovery that is going to be broader than the economic growth that we saw in the last decade, and it certainly needs to be broader than what we're seeing in 2020. And that means, by definition, for technology, I think something that provides better access to broadband. Recognizing that it really is the 21st century's version of electricity. I think it means providing people with the digital skills they need to succeed. I think it means thinking about what technology needs to do to create more opportunity for the communities of color across this country and for people with disabilities. 1 in every 7 of us has some kind of disability, permanent or temporary. And if we're thoughtful, if we bring the private and public sectors together, if we work closely with the nonprofit community, I think we can design a recovery that is inclusive in this way.
Brad, you're one of the very few corporate officials, or really officials anywhere, who's willing to acknowledge when things could be done better. And I think that's very interesting, what you say about how we could be smarter than we were in the last decade.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of work to do. Whenever you talk about what you want to do, I think you have to start by asking, well, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And I think you have to be prepared to look a problem in the face and acknowledge it. And in this instance, I think that the COVID pandemic has really helped us, to be honest. It's shined a spotlight. The broadband divide was here in 2019. The skills gap was here last year as well. Its impact is even greater in the current economic climate. But more than anything else, this spotlight helps us see things more clearly. And I hope that gives us the ability and the inspiration we need to take more effective and stronger action to address these problems.
Now, Brad, in your book, Tools and Weapons, you make the point that really all jobs, or certainly most jobs, are trending digital. What's it like to have every job essentially be a digital job?
Well, I think what it means is that we're all going to need more digital skills. And this is going to be something that increases probably in terms of momentum every year throughout the decade ahead. It's easy when people see a company like Microsoft to think, oh, yeah, we create software, and we do. But the truth is, if you're in customer sales or support, if you're in marketing, frankly, you probably need to understand something about digital marketing. If you're a teacher today, oh my gosh, just think about your need to master digital technology in September of 2020 and how that compared to a year ago. So, what we are seeing across the board is almost all jobs involve more digital skills than they did before.
So you bring up teachers, and there was a lot of frustration around remote learning in the spring as we head toward the fall. And sadly, it looks like a lot of learning is still going to be remote. What did we learn in the spring that could help make that smoother or happier or more productive or more efficient in the fall?
Well, I think we probably have to sort of again be realistic. We go into the fall being smarter. I think we've learned a lot about how to use technology better, how to engage students in a more effective way. I mean, teachers have learned so much, but in many ways, let's be honest, the kids that lacked a broadband connection in May are probably going to lack it in September as well. If someone was in a home that didn't have enough digital devices to go around, they may still be facing that same problem as they start school in a couple of weeks. So, for a country for whom I think universal public education has been a defining value and attribute of our society, we have a huge problem. Let's do the best we can. Let's do everything we can in the months ahead, but let's also think ahead and let's say never again. Let's build the kind of infrastructure that will enable all of our kids to do homework after school. And if we face another epidemic or pandemic, we'll be prepared in a way that we are not right now.
During the Democratic National Convention, when Milwaukee is top of mind for everyone, you like to use Wisconsin as an illustration for your point about our digital future.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that we're doing in Wisconsin. And of course, I'm very excited about that, having come from Wisconsin. We have a program in 6 parts of the country. It's called TechSpark, and it's in northeastern Wisconsin. And it's really designed to enable us to learn from local communities and invest and work with local communities. So we're getting computer science into the high schools in the region. We have volunteers, team teaching with teachers. And so we're bringing computer science to every school. We're working with the Green Bay Packers at what's called Titletown Tech, creating a tech incubator to create more local tech jobs and tech growth opportunities for local companies. We're working with local companies to bring broadband to northeastern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And these are just examples of what I think we need more broadly across the country. For us, it's an enormous learning opportunity. I think for everything we give in terms of money or technology, we get back something tenfold just because we're learning things that we can then spread more broadly.
If I had to guess, I would bet that you are a Packers shareholder.
I have a longstanding Packers shareholder, which is a point of pride and gives me nothing other than the right to basically have a certificate on the wall and go to a shareholder meeting. But that's one of the wonderful things about Wisconsin. It unifies the population, at least almost everybody who lives 10 miles beyond Minneapolis.
It's a great local tradition. Now, Brad, over the last few years, as tech increasingly has come into the crosshairs of Washington, something you've been candid about is you've told your fellow tech executives that if you don't acknowledge a problem, you can't solve it. And you've been saying that for a while. To do a little twist on the Ed Koch question, how are you doing?
Well, I think, we're doing better as an industry, and I'd like to think we're doing better as a company. And I will always say we probably have more progress ahead of us than behind us. I think we have to start by asking, where is tech succeeding and where is it making things harder? Because it is sort of a dual-sided coin, if you will. That's why we chose the title, Tools and Weapons, for our book. In the world today, technology is an incredibly powerful tool, but it has been weaponized, whether it's in the world of cyber attacks or just in the various, societal divides it's exacerbating. And I think, we were born as an industry free of regulation. But given the impact of technology on society today, we need to step up and recognize we need to exercise more responsibility ourselves, and we need to help governments move forward faster and even create a regulatory floor. If we don't do those things, I just think all the challenges we face are going to become even bigger, and none of us should feel good about that.
Brad, you mentioned cyber attacks, and something that you've been very forward leaning on is how do we protect our elections? How do we protect voters, candidates, democracy?
Well, I think, first of all, this is a really important week to have this conversation. I think we should start by reminding ourselves that it was 4 years ago at the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia that our eyes were first opened to nation-state cyber attacks on candidates and campaigns. It was a Russian attack on the Democratic Convention and Hillary Clinton's campaign. Here we are again 4 years later. Where are we? We have stronger defenses and we understand the threats better. That is really good. But the threats are becoming more sophisticated. They're coming from more countries. We are seeing attacks that are more likely to succeed than they were 4 years ago, precisely because they are more numerous and more sophisticated. I think we need to be doing more, not only to protect candidates and campaigns and journalists and think tanks, but where I think we really need to focus our energy is continuing to fight disinformation and securing our voting systems. If there's one thing I think we should all worry about more, it's the risk that someday, hopefully not this year, but someday we may see a determined nation-state attack against voter rolls or the voting process. And we are not yet, in my view, where we need to be, and we need to keep moving forward in the tech sector, but really with local communities, counties, states, and the federal government to harden our defense of voting.
It's a sobering, important message. You've been very prescient on. I'm getting an urgent wrap-up signal, but real quick, I'd love to leave things on a little higher note. And Microsoft rolls out a lot of cool things, but I got to say, online, people are loving the flight simulator. And I understand that you are even about to try it.
I am. I remember using Flight Simulator when it first came out, and that's another thing that dates me. And I remember then thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if someday there could be a version of Flight Simulator that would really show every part of the world or a state, that would capture real-time weather? Well, that day is this week. It is today. It was earlier this week. It's a big program. It takes a little time to download, but I think it's something that people will really enjoy. It's out now for the PC. It's coming to Xbox. It's a new way. It may be the safest possible way, especially in a pandemic, for people to travel the world.
Thank you very much, Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, and thank you to Microsoft for making these conversations possible. Our next guest is Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, coming off of 2 nights in a row at the Democratic National Convention. Senator Klobuchar was the first woman to be elected to represent Minnesota in the Senate, and before that, she ran the largest prosecutor's office in Minnesota for 8 years. Senator Klobuchar, welcome to Axios.
Well, thanks so much. It is wonderful to be on, Mike, and I love the topic. It couldn't be more timely to focus on tech and some of the issues involving the internet right now for so many people out there. And yes, I had a lot of fun at the convention, our virtual convention, the last few days, and we're psyched to be here. Thanks.
Senator, for you, this is like a convention without after parties. What's that like?
Yeah, as you probably know, because I know you stay up late working, Mike. I just happen to know that and corresponding with you. I like conventions. I like wearing the silly hats. I like, having the signs. I even have a few here, right here, ready for my various scenes that I have when I go on these state Zoom calls. And it's a different thing. And I think there's advantages to it. I love the roll call, for instance, of all the states, where instead of just having the same people standing up holding signs, you saw the calamari in Rhode Island and touching scenes across the country. And so I think that part's been good, but it is hard not to see people. So I just keep trying to make up for it by going on these Zoom calls and watching their faces and seeing the excitement. And again, we're allowing people to speak at the convention that normally wouldn't fly out. And I think that's a pretty important symbol.
Senator, you've been talking about the importance of broadband, rural broadband, since long before the pandemic. Your Keeping Critical Connections Act is very focused on that. I've heard you say that this pandemic is acting a little bit like an X-ray of our society.
Exactly. These problems and disparities with people in our rural areas and people who don't have as much money, it's been going on a long time. We know that. But now it's gotten down to the hardcore problem that they can't even learn if they don't have high-speed broadband. I have met with virtually superintendents all over my state, and they say, which is about the state average, 10 to 15% of their students really can't access learning right now. They couldn't in the spring, and they're not going to be able to in the fall. And, that's because they get the tablet. And for instance, Microsoft and many other companies have done a good job of helping. The government has our E-rate program. So in a lot of cases, they get the equipment now. So it's not an unsolved problem. But then they have to learn how to use it. Elementary school kids, that can be hard. But the biggest problem of all is a lot of them don't have the internet that allows them to do it. And the superintendents have told me 10 to 15% of their kids in a lot of parts of my state, they're dropping off pencil and paper for these kids to try to learn that way off of workbooks or just mimeograph pieces of paper. And all the other kids are participating on the internet. And that's outrageously unfair. And that is why we've got to have the short-term problems solved so that we actually are trying within the HEROES Act and the bills in front of us to get the funding out for students and for schools and upping our game. But then in the long term, the bill that I lead in the Senate and Representative Clyburn leads in the House, making sure everyone has access to high-speed internet. They do it in Iceland, and they've got volcanoes spewing ash there. And they get I've been there. You can get internet anywhere. And we should be able to do that in America.
Senator, as you've been out meeting with constituents, you've discovered some really astonishing, even insane workarounds that people have resorted to.
Yeah. One of my favorites and saddest is the student in public school in a rural county who takes her biology quizzes now in the liquor store parking lot in the town. The doctor who can look at x-rays in the hospital, that is true. But as you know, during the pandemic, whenever people can do things at home and late night problems, patients not wanting to come in unless it's an emergency, he can't look at the x-rays in his home. So he has to go into McDonald's to do it. The kid on the tribal land who gets internet and looks out the window and there's all these kids in the front yard. That's because they're doing their homework, and it's the only place that had the high-speed internet that could afford it. That's what's going on in a nutshell across America, not just in my state. And that's why that plus seniors not having access to see their loved ones are really right out front for us as reasons why we got to think now.
Senator, Democrats are getting increasingly optimistic about taking control of the Senate. I'm sure you like the ring, Madam Chair. If Democrats have control of the Senate, what would the outlook for a big infrastructure bill be?
I think very good. First of all, you have in Joe Biden someone who wanted to go big on infrastructure a long time ago. He's the guy that took the train to work every day. And he has long, even at the beginning of the economic downturn when he was the vice president, I remember him directly talking to me, saying that he wanted to do more with infrastructure. So he's been a long-time proponent. Of course, that includes broadband. And then you have the fact that the Democrats in the Senate and the House have long been pushing this. And I think it's too bad that it didn't get done in the last year or way before that. When our bridge fell down in Minnesota, just a few blocks from my home, I fought hard to do a major infrastructure plan for this country. And it can also include private-public partnerships, the infrastructure bank that we have out there, so many things that we could do to update our funding for transportation.
I should ask you, what do you feel like the outlook is for Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer becoming Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer?
I think it's very good. And I'm not just saying that because I want it to happen. I'm looking at the polls and what's happening in the race in Arizona, where Mark Kelly's out front in every poll that I've seen. You're looking in Colorado, where the polls that I've seen, you've got Governor Hickenlooper in front, Governor Bullock in Montana. These are fantastic candidates, for one thing. We're doing well in Maine. We're doing very well in North Carolina, something that people didn't predict. And then you go beyond that to some of these that are incumbents, Tina Smith in my state and Gary, and then Jean Shaheen are doing well. Doug Jones, as I wouldn't bet against him in a minute, in Alabama. And then you've got these stretch races in Georgia, 2 seats at stake with the incumbents not that popular. And then you go to Texas. So we're pretty excited about what's happening around the country and Joe Biden's leadership.
Senator, as we think about the way that technology has touched us personally in this COVID era, you've talked about a moment with your dad, Jim Klobuchar, who, when he was a sports columnist for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, the Strib, was one of the best known people in the state, and tech has helped you have a very personal connection with him.
Yeah, well, like everyone else with someone that you love in assisted living, I haven't since this started to go in and see him. And he actually is in a home of 16 people. He has Alzheimer's, and they got struck with COVID. Half the people got it and 3 people died. And he got it. And I will never forget standing outside of a glass window with my family, talking to him through a cell phone that was piped into his room and thinking it was the last time I was going to see him. And he knew who we were, but he was very confused by what was going on. And it was so sad. And he looked so small. And he came through it. And I continued to, of course, talk to him over the phone, which tends to be a little easier because even though the nurses couldn't be nicer with the equipment, it's small cell phones and things like that. So that's one of the reasons Senator Casey and Capito and I introduced Access Act, just because even before the pandemic, we knew this was a problem. It is funding for assisted livings and the like, so they can have major equipment, right? Big TVs, because a lot of seniors might not be able to see a little phone. And they're not, some of them will operate it all themselves very well, of course. But some of them will need help, and you might want to have a central location for them to go to see their loved ones in an easy way for the staff to operate it. It's that simple. It's broadband, but it's also the equipment. And I think it is the future.
Senator, we're getting the hook here. 2 rapid round questions. Senator,
Okay.
President Trump came closer in Minnesota in 2016 than most people thought. Their campaign at first talked a lot about Minnesota. Now they don't talk about it at all.
Well, I think we will win Minnesota. Joe Biden will win Minnesota. I helped him win it in the primary, and he's going to win it big in the general election. But President Trump continues. He was just in my state this week, and he continues. And I think when he was here last time, he said something like, if I can't do this, I'm not coming back. And my colleague Tina Smith wrote on Twitter, that's the plan. So that's verse. Yes, I think we will win big time.
And Senator, last question. You were very early in talking strongly about the dangers of Russian interference in elections. Are things better or worse than they were in 2016?
I thought they're better in that we know their game plan and we're more ready. But I think they're worse because the administration that's running things right now has shown a propensity. One, the president, as Nancy Pelosi once said, all roads lead to Putin. But also just when it comes to what they're doing on mail the Postal Service, what they are doing when it comes to not adequately funding and helping our states during the pandemic with elections. So it feels to me very much like they're trying to foment chaos. They're just finding another way to do it. That's why the House is coming back on an emergency basis. That's why Mitch should call the Senate back, because everyone, Democrat, Republican, Independent, has a right to vote. And I would rather put ballots in the mailbox than voters in the hospital.
Senator, does the intelligence that you see show you that Russia's doing about what they did in 2016, or that they're being more aggressive?
We believe they're continuing. And of course, based on classified briefings I've had, and also this latest report that showed the raw nature of what they tried to do. I'll quote the Trump intelligence people. They said they're just getting bolder, and that last election was a dress rehearsal for what they're going to try now. There's every reason to believe they're going to do it again. I just believe at least we have our eyes wide open. I am so hopeful that with the new administration, we can do something about digital ads and pass my Honest Ads Act that Lindsey Graham's now on, that we're going to be able to more adequately fund to get better voting equipment and the like. But for right now, at least the mail-in ballots can't be hacked into like the voting machines. It's another reason to vote by mail.
Senator, as we say goodbye, you got great pickup the other night from your speech to the Democratic convention. Even the late night shows, especially the late night shows, picked up some of your clips. But a little bird tells me that there was something in your shot that we couldn't see as you direct the Democratic National Convention.
Exactly. And that is the one, people talk about wearing pajamas while they're doing TV interviews, and you just look good from the waist up. My little trick was that I was in my bare feet, because standing practicing for a while was enough. And it was great. You could never do that at a national convention where you have to wear fancy high shoes so you look tall. Yeah, you can do it in your bare feet and no one else. We don't know what Bernie had on his feet when he stood in front of that wood pile. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar, for joining Axios. Thank you to Microsoft for these great conversations. I'd love to talk with you every day. My newsletter is Axios AM, Axios PM. Easy to get at signup.axios.com, signup.axios.com. And we'd love to see you back here next Tuesday during the Republican National Convention, Tuesday, 12:30 p.m. Thanks to Microsoft, we're going to be having conversations about economic recovery amid COVID. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining our Axios virtual event, and I'll see you on Axios.com.